There's no getting away from the fact that Perth, Western Australia is a city that's very car orientated and as a result car dependent. The vast majority of its population live in low density single family homes, often with very few amenities within a walkable distance. Now, when we see cities with similar levels of car-oriented urban design across the globe, think of places like Houston in Texas or Atlanta in Georgia, we also tend to see some pretty poor public transport networks, but that's not really the case in Perth. Don't get me wrong, Perth's transit system, called Transperth, has a lot of room for improvement, but for a city as sprawling and car-focused as Perth, it's more impressive than you might think. If we compare per capita transit ridership across Australia's major cities, Perth comes in at a comfortable third place, despite having almost 500,000 fewer people than Brisbane, which placed fourth. If we look back to the US, to Houston and Atlanta, in both cases Perth has significantly higher per capita transit ridership than both cities, even though they all have relatively similar population densities. This is because, especially in recent years and decades, Perth has actually been investing a lot in its transit system, and at the moment, this system seems to be undergoing the biggest expansion in the city's history in the form of Metronet. Now, the system hasn't always been in such a good place. In fact, in the late 70s, the Western Australian government shut down one of the city's then 3 railway lines, that being the Fremantle line, due to a lack of patronage, and the plan was to use the railway's alignment to build a new highway between Fremantle and the Perth CBD. Thankfully, this closure did not last very long, with the line being brought back just 4 years later, but I think it does show the state of public transport policy in Western Australia at the time, and I think it makes the city's current transit building spree even more impressive. As I said earlier, Metronet is Perth's largest ever public transportation project, and it's going to be, and indeed already has been, delivering a lot of new dedicated rail infrastructure. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at all the changes Metronet is going to bring to Perth, what the city's transport network will look like when it's done, as well as what this all means for other sprawling and low-density cities who want to build out their transit networks. Hi all, I'm City Moose and I make videos about transport and urbanism, so if you like the sound of that, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to support the channel, you could check out my Ko-fi, it is always appreciated. But getting slightly back on topic, I recently did a video about the GO Rail expansion project in Toronto, and in that video I said that GO expansion is probably the most impactful public transport project currently underway in North America. Which got me thinking, what's the most impactful project currently underway in Australia? There are a few good contenders. Melbourne has their Metro Tunnel, their Suburban Rail Loop and their on-again off-again airport rail line. Brisbane has Cross River Rail and their bus rapid transit project that's confusingly branded as Metro, and Adelaide has, well, honestly not much. Adelaide really could use some more ambitious projects on their transport network in my view. But above all of these, 2 projects really stand out to me. Of course, there's Sydney's Metro project, which is adding like 3 new automated metro lines and has already proven itself to be a massive success. That project's already gotten a lot of attention from the media and YouTube channels like this one, but the other major project, which hasn't gotten nearly as much recognition, that I think could be a contender for the title of Australia's most impactful transit project, is Perth's Metronet, as this project will be dramatically increasing the scale and usefulness of Perth's passenger railways. At the cost of about $11.5 billion, Metronet is not exactly cheap, but compared to railway projects in other cities, its cost seems pretty reasonable. As a point of comparison, Melbourne's Airport Rail Link project has an estimated price tag of around $13 billion for a single line with just 2 new stations. Meanwhile, for a lower price, Metronet is delivering a whole host of new train stations, various rail extensions, and 2 completely new train lines, among other things, which does seem like a bit better value. So then, what are the main things Metronet is delivering, or indeed has already delivered? Well, let's start with the extensions of existing lines. Here's a map of Perth's train network before Metronet, and we can see the network had 5 lines, all converging in the CBD, with those being the Fremantle line to the west, the Butler line to the north, the Mandurah line to the south, and the Midlands line and Armidale and Thornlie lines heading east. The first extension to open as part of Metronet was to Yanchep in the north, and saw the Butler line extended about 15 kilometres up the coast, with new stops serving new suburbs on Perth's urban fringe at Alkimos, Eglinton and Yanchep. This extension also saw that line renamed to the Yanchep line following Perth's train line naming convention of naming them after their final stops. The next extension to open as part of Metronet, which will literally be opening this month, so it may or may not be open by the time I post this video, is the Thornlie-Cockburn link, which will see Perth get its first orbital-style rail link. This link builds off the existing Thornlie line that branched off the Armadale line for a single station at Thornlie, which sits on a freight rail corridor that runs through Perth's southern suburbs. This extension will see passenger services added to more of this corridor, with new stations at Nicholson Road and Ranford Road, before diverging from the freight railway for a connection with the Mandurah line at Cockburn Central, which is home to a major retail precinct and a growing amount of higher density housing. The areas around Nicholson and Ranford Road are mostly either undeveloped or industrial, but these new stations will see that start to change as these areas have been earmarked for future development. As I said, this line will also mark the first time Perth's transport network has offered a orbital-style route, as opposed to the radial style of its other rail lines, which is great to see as it's creating new interchange opportunities that will help the train network become useful for more than just travelling between the suburbs and the CBD. This extension will also see the line get its own colour on the map, it previously just used the Armadale line's yellow, and get the name the Thornlie-Cockburn line. The final rail extension happening as part of Metronet will see the Armadale line extended about 8 km south to the town of Byford. Byford is currently one of the fastest growing regions in WA, and while it already has a train station, it's served by the Diesel Australind service, a service that's very infrequent, basically only running 2 return trips each day. Though it does look like this might be improving soon. Those frequencies are not enough to support the growing region, so the new extension will see the rails between Armadale and Byford double-tracked as well as electrified, and the stations at Armadale and Byford upgraded, in order to allow for Byford station to be added to the Armadale line, which will then mean much more frequent rail service, and also probably that line being renamed to the Byford line. Now, this won't be the only changes coming to the Armadale line. On top of the extension, a substantial part of the line is being rebuilt to remove the level crossings along it. 6 level crossings are being removed between Victoria Park and Beckenham Station, as well as 7 more along the Byford extension. This should improve the reliability and safety of the line, as cars and pedestrians will be less likely to find themselves on the tracks when they shouldn't be. It will also see quite a few old stations rebuilt as modern elevated stations that'll offer improved accessibility and a better passenger experience. That said, as is usually the case with level crossing removal projects, the primary beneficiaries will be drivers who will no longer need to stop and wait at said crossings. However, now let's turn our heads to the 2 new train lines being built as part of Metronet. The first to open was the Airport line, which began operating in 2022 and branches off the Midland line just after Bayswater Station, for new stations at Redcliffe, Airport Central and High Wycombe. Obviously, this line saw Perth finally get a rail link to its airport, making it the 3rd Australian city to do so after Sydney and Brisbane. Come on, Melbourne. It was also built almost entirely underground, with a tunnelled section starting shortly after the line branches off at Bayswater and ending just before the line surfaces at High Wycombe Station, making Redcliffe and Airport Central Perth's only underground train stations besides Perth Underground in the CBD. It's also worth noting that the airport line through runs at Perth Station down to Claremont on the Fremantle line, so that station also got upgraded to allow trains to stop and turn back there. The other new line to open also branches off the Midlands line at Bayswater, with that line being the Ellenbrook line, which opened just last year. This line saw 5 new stations built at Morley, Buranda, Ballajura, Whiteman Park and Ellenbrook. Perth's northwest has seen substantial population growth in recent years, and up until now those suburbs have only really been served by buses, so the new rail line brings a welcome improvement to the transport options in this area. Now with the Midland, Airport and Ellenbrook lines running through it, Bayswater Station has become a significant interchange station, and as a result has also received a significant upgrade. I will say that I have some slight concerns about the capacity of the track that runs between Bayswater and Perth stations, as these 3 lines now must just share 2 sets of track, which will limit how many services can be run on each line, and that means as the patronage of these lines grow, we may see this section of track become a bit of a bottleneck. There are plans to at least partially address this though by introducing high capacity signalling across the network. The current signalling system limits most lines to running about 15 trains an hour, but with the upgraded system that should be almost double, which should mean a lot more capacity. Besides that though, the other parts of Metronet worth mentioning include the addition of a new infill station on the Mandurah line at Lakelands to support the growing communities in that area, A fun fact about that is prior to Lakeland Station opening, the distance between Warnbro and Mandurah stations, which were the furthest apart stations on the entire Transperth network, was longer than the entire Fremantle line. But regardless, there's also another proposed new station just north of Lakelands at Carnup, but the plans for that one are in early stages. To support all these new lines, Transperth has also needed to order some new trains, with these being the C-Series trains based on Alstom's Extrapolis family, which is also used on Melbourne's rail network. And these new trains will also be replacing the city's aging A-Series trains. This about wraps it up for all the major works coming as part of Metronet, and it is a lot. In total, Perth is going to see 72 kilometers of new track and 23 new stations added to its railway network, which should altogether unlock around 8,000 hectares of land for new developments, which is very welcome given Perth's current housing crisis. There has been talk of adding even more to Metronet, including talk of a light rail system that could serve Perth's inner suburbs, and an expanded ferry network along the Swan River, a topic I've already covered in a separate video. I'll put a link to it on screen. But not much has come from either of these. That said, I do hope the momentum of Metronet is kept up, and more projects are undertaken. For example, I think it could be interesting to see that light rail idea revisited. Various Australian cities, from Sydney to Canberra to the Gold Coast, have seen a lot of success with recent light rail projects, so perhaps Perth could do the same. I also think there's good reason to look into extending the Fremantle line. While the Transperth line stops at Fremantle, a freight alignment continues quite far after that, and there have been plans in the past to turn that into a passenger line. Given the southern part of Perth has experienced a lot of growth in recent years, especially places like Coogee and Spearwood that this freight line runs through, adding passenger services to these tracks presents a very easy way to get these places rail access. Such a line could even extend along most of the southern freight corridor to form what has been called the Southern Circle line, which would open up a whole host of new interchange opportunities. There's even a similar proposal north of the river that would have seen a line built along Reed Highway between the Yanchep and Ellenbrook lines to create a Northern Circle line. This would share tracks with another proposed line up to Wanneroo, although I gotta say this would really put a lot of pressure on the tracks between Bayswater and Perth Station, and an additional set of tracks would almost certainly need to be added. These circle routes were proposed in the early days of Metronet and not much has been done about them, but since the recent WA state election there has been some renewed interest in them, and I do think it would be pretty cool to see them happen. With all that said, as thrilled as I am about Metronet, it's not going to completely escape some criticism, and that's primarily going to be about the land use around the stations. If we look at some of the recent stations opened as part of Metronet, like Yanchep Station for example, we can see that a substantial amount of the land around the station is just being used for parking, and not even multi-storey parking, but surface-level parking lots. This is a very inefficient use of prime land so close to the station. The around 900 parking bays at Yanchep take up a lot of space, but assuming an average of a little over one person in each car, a full parking lot would barely just fill a single C-Series train. This is a bit reflective of Perth's strategy when it comes to train stations, which has been more focused on offering park and rides and good bus links to get people to the stations, rather than focusing on letting a lot of people live within a walkable distance of them. But personally, I don't see why we can't have both, with dense walkable cores around the stations filled with lots of housing, shops and amenities, while still keeping the good bus links to help people living further away access said shops and amenities as well as of course at the station. These land use problems aren't helped by the fact that Perth still seems to like putting its train lines down the middle of freeways, which does help make them cheaper, but land next to freeways tends not to be the most pleasant places to create those walkable neighbourhoods. That said, even with the poor land use around a lot of the stations, I think Perth's system does prove that low density and car-oriented cities can still benefit from a good mass transit system. You'll often hear a lot of people saying that it's not worth building a rail network or even improving the bus system in certain cities, because these cities are already too built for cars and nobody will be willing to switch to public transport. And I think Perth is a great case study that proves that wrong. It's very sprawly, not super walkable and highly car-centric, but despite this, and thanks to good investment in public transport in recent decades, the city does manage to have a relatively successful public transport system. And with the continued investment into the system with projects like Metronet, I think we can only expect the success of the system to get even greater. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look into the city I mostly grew up in. Personally, I'm very pleased to see its transport network making such big strides. If you did enjoy it, consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. I'd also like to hear from you guys on what you think Australia's best transit project is at the moment. I'm a bit split between this one and the Sydney Metro, but projects like Melbourne's Metro Tunnel and Brisbane's Cross River Rail are also contenders. Leave a comment with your thoughts. If you want to support the channel, check out my Ko-fi, it's always greatly appreciated. And you can check out my Instagram and Twitter/X as well. I'm not doing much with either account at the moment, but I may start eventually. Regardless, I'm Kyle, aka City Moose, and as always, thanks for watching.